Those roaring 20s, affectionately labeled as one of 20th century's most dynamic decades, are etched in history as a time of booming economics. As we delve deeper into that sector, we find that life was flourishing for everyone. And the artistic community was indeed a part of the cultural revolution taking place during those times. Pages within books professed of contemporary and different views, yearning to ensure that all voices would be heard. Famous author Langston Hughes, in his iconic work, The Weary Blues, is masterful as he writes about passionately, purposefully, and personally about the lives of Black Americans. He was masterful as he used language, tone, and the rhythm of the jazz and blues music of that time. T.S. Eliot, in his masterpiece, The Wasteland, writes about the devastating aftermath of the First World War, while also redefining forever how prose and poetry would be written. And lest we forget, Margery Williams, the Velveteen Rabbit. She writes extols about love, life, and an urging to belong. So, leaders of 2021, take a long and determined look at your team members. What books are they writing? What stories should they be sharing? Leaders at the top of the leaderboard understand that they only succeed when their team members succeed. So, Matt, what book of the Roaring Twenties spoke to you?
Thanks, Twana. The book I chose from the Roaring Twenties is The Sun Also Rises by Ernest Hemingway, which was published in 1926. The book has several important themes: the disillusionment with war coming out of World War I, masculinity and gender expectations, and escapism, escaping those horrors of war and those well-defined gender expectations, largely through drinking. Isn't it remarkable how the mental health issues that were dominant then are still central now in our roaring 2020s? I read The Sun Also Rises when I was in American Lit class in college, and I was studying Spanish at the time, and the book inspired me to go to Pamplona to watch the running of the bulls. One quick story. After staying up all night with a group of Spanish people I'd met there, we wandered over to where the bulls would be running in the morning at the crack of dawn. And once I was there, I announced to the group, "I'm going to jump in and run." And one of the women in the group looked at me right in the eye and said, "Do not go in there." I got the message. I think she probably saved my life. Now, in our roaring 2020s, we're still reeling from the disillusionment with war, from coming out of the Afghanistan war. And even before the COVID pandemic, men in the US were experiencing a crisis of masculinity, as evidenced by high levels of both substance abuse and suicides. The opioid epidemic still plagues us, and the pandemic isn't helping. Psychologist Dr. Harriet Fraud speaks eloquently about this mental health crisis. She says that hope and connection are the ways to mitigate the psychological distress, and I couldn't agree more. Kimberly, your practice focuses on connections. Does this make sense to you?
It sure does, Matt. First, I have to acknowledge your courageous desire to run with the bulls, and thank goodness you're still here with us today. And regarding connection, I could not agree with you more. There is much study about the need for connection, and actually can be the antidote to addiction. And I actually devote an entire chapter in my book, Connections Change Everything, because true human connection really can be a healer in so many ways. Regarding my favorite book, it's hard to believe that a book written about a gentleman in the late 1800s whose love and affection is torn between two starkly contrasting women could easily be rewritten and reenacted in our world today. The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton, considered her greatest work, actually won her the Pulitzer Prize and the first woman to do so. In this love story, Newland's fiancée, May, is sweet, proper, and from a reputable and powerful family, and does not associate with commoners. His other love, Ellen, is in the midst of a divorce from her European husband, and her character is real, vulnerable, authentic, and unfortunately, a silent outcast in the New York community. Almost 2 centuries later, the holding of pretense by the powerful and wealthy and the invisible safety net from criminal activity still exists. Those with power and wealth can easily judge and be exclusive. Ellen notices this inauthentic state of being, Ellen notices this inauthentic state of being and even states to Newland, the only loneliness I feel is living here with all of these kind people. Yet not one of these kind people really want to hear the truth. And then she bursts into tears and Newland tries to comfort her. And then through the tears, she even says, do people even cry here? What can we take away from this great book? Let this be the decade and century where this lack of transparency and absence of empathy for others' plights, judgment and rejection of those who are different stops. I challenge you to consciously alter your mindset to be vulnerable, inclusive, and empathetic to others, not only as leaders, but also as community members. So again, the themes of the 1920s continue to echo into our 2020s and alert us to pay attention to the history we may or may not want to repeat.